Hey everybody, Michael June here with Game Changers for Government Contractors, and I've got Marsha here with me today. Marsha, you're a returning guest. We've talked about pricing and some other cool things. Today we're going to take a little bit different slant on proposals, so that's going to be a good conversation. But before we jump into that, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Really is. I'm about money and government contracting. Let's say this. I'm the money gal.
The money
When
gal. I
people
like it.
say, okay, Marsha, we're not making enough money on our contracts, or we're not winning because of price. It's all about money, right? It's all about managing the money, bidding the money the right way to win, but also to make profit. So I've been doing this for the better part of 30 plus years. I love it. I live, breathe, and eat government contracting, pricing, money, anything that's related to that. And I like to talk to my clients about bidding wisely, not only bidding to win, bidding to make profit, but also I don't want them to bid something and be sorry that they won it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean, Michael?
Absolutely. And that ties in with Josh's favorite saying, it's not about the money, it's about the money.
It is
That's
about
Josh's
the
favorite
money.
saying. And my newest favorite saying is it's not about, what you make, it's what you keep.
Yes.
To me,
People, oh,
there's too many
yes,
people that are like revenue, revenue, revenue. And I'm like, it
right,
doesn't matter if you make $10 million in revenue, if you
right.
lose $1 million or you
Yeah,
don't make any money. Like, why are you in this to be a nonprofit? And people are like, we're not a nonprofit. I'm like, you're not making money. You're a nonprofit
you're a
at this point.
nonprofit.
You're a nonprofit. You just don't know it. When you sent me over the topic today, my first thoughts around looking at it was bid less, win more. That was the thought that I had around it, because the focus
Yep,
was around not just chasing everything under the sun. I
right,
did a podcast with John Barker a few months ago, and he's like, it's not about finding opportunities, right? You can find opportunities all day. It's about finding winnable opportunities,
and the right
because they're
one's for you.
yeah, and the right ones for you. Because, and I do see a lot of clients that are chasing things. I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Why are you chasing this staffing contract for this really obscure, like a landscaper, and you're an IT company? Well, I need past performance. Not as a landscaper. Like, how's that going to help your
Right,
IT business? It's very interesting, the mentality of even companies that come
right.
from, or people that come from big companies that'll say, well, just go get all the revenue you can so you can position for an acquisition. I don't know, if I was looking at a company
Right.
and they were racking up revenue and they're an IT company, and I'm like, wait a minute, why is 30% of your revenue all of a sudden in the last year and a half landscaping? What's going,
Doesn't
we're
make
not going to
sense.
pursue that. That doesn't make any sense. And so it's interesting, some of the advice I see out there that I just have to shake my head. I'm like, you come from $1 billion company and you're saying, oh, position for an acquisition by getting these garbage contracts. I'm like, gosh, that's so stupid. It
It
just,
is dumb.
that's in Mike's opinion, right? But so from your perspective, the bid less, win more. Give me
Right.
like your philosophy on this, and then we'll kind of dig into it.
My philosophy is to stay focused on your wheelhouse. Stay focused on what you do and you do really, really well, where you already have past performance, where you have good client relationships, where you have the relationships, or where you have not only with the government customer, but maybe with some of your teammates too, okay? But also that are something you can win first, right? A high probability of winning. And we're going to talk about that a lot, I'm sure. But more importantly, that you can make a profit. I mean, like you just were saying about revenue, I talk to so many of my clients who are focused on revenue, 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 and I'm like, who cares? I don't mean that I don't care. What I mean is, what does your profit margin look like?
Mm-hmm.
I am very, very focused on keeping more, winning more, and keeping more. Keeping more meaning more profits, okay? More profitable business. Let me give you an example, and then we can launch into this. I had talked to a client yesterday, and we were buttoning up a bid. And I said, so how many did you bid last year? He said, we bid 66 contracts. And I said, how many did you win? He said about 20%. 20%. That's 12 out of 60. And I said, how many are you bidding this year? He said, about 20. I said, so you got smart. He goes, yeah. And I said, were all the ones you won profitable? And he said, they're all profitable, but some more than others. My point is that when we talked about what they were going after this year, what they're focused on, literally that is what they're focused on. Stuff that they've done, stuff where the client not only knows them, sometimes it's a new client, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of their own wheelhouse. It's their
Mm.
capabilities that they know and they position themselves very well for. Positioning themselves very, very well means that you're backing up and spending some time in capture. You're not just throwing bids, 60 bids over the, into the ether, so to speak, Michael.
Yeah.
You know?
It's so dangerous playing that game because it costs time, it costs money, it costs
Oh,
energy.
yeah.
And I think the one thing that most people, when they're focused on a high number like that, they don't consider is how demoralizing it is to the
Oh, yeah.
team to just
Oh,
keep losing.
yeah.
Nobody wants to be a loser. Let's start there, right?
Right.
Nobody wants to be a loser. And if you are losing 80% of the time you play the game, at some point you start to hate life, right? Like
Right.
you're like, I don't want to come into work. I don't want to fill this
Right.
out. And at some point you're like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to turn it in. So like you just go down in the rankings versus up because it's just, you're a loser. And it's not
Yes.
because you personally are a loser, but you've adopted a losing mentality of doing something that doesn't have a high probability of winning, which I always, when I'm
Right.
talking with people and they get into the whole P-win conversation. Like, what's your P-win? I'm like, you realize you don't understand what a P-win is simply because you asked the question. You know,
Right.
my probability of winning is a complete guess.
It's a
It
dart at the wall.
yeah, it is based on some factors, but it is an absolute guess. Your actual conversion rate is how good you are at actually chasing opportunities. Like you said
Right.
with the 20%. So I know I've chased 60, I've won the 12. I can put a fixed number on that and say that's
Right.
actually how good I am versus the P win being a probability of winning. And I think people get those two mixed up.
They
They
get them
think that's just,
confused.
yeah, that's my convert. No, that's not your conversion rate. That's your
No.
probability based on a handful of factors, which most of them are guesses,
Yep.
right?
And
I
some
think,
people try and put science to it, Michael. They try
yeah,
and do this calculation. At the end of the day, it's what do you feel like? What do
yeah.
you feel your probability is?
Yeah, my favorite one is, now a lot of the bid matching tools have a P win that is auto calculated somehow. And most of them are like, if it's in this stage, set the P win at this. If it's in this stage, set it to that. And it auto calculates that with literally no other factors. Now,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it'll say, hey, the probability is higher because it's looked and it noticed that last time there were only 2 bidders or 3 bidders or something along those lines. But still, how realistic is that number? It's again, it's a total guess. So having some sort of system that you use to create that, I think is really important because,
Right.
like you say, you shouldn't be swinging at things that are in the 40% range, right?
Mm-mm.
If you
Mm-mm.
think, hey, I've only got a 40%, I think if it's not 80% or higher, there's probably a good chance you
Right.
shouldn't be bidding on it. But, for a lot of companies that we talk to, one of the biggest challenges for them is they don't have enough things in their wheelhouse, in their pipeline. So,
Right.
what are your thoughts for that? Because I think
Okay.
that's where people get desperate and say, "Well, let's just put anything in. I don't care if it's landscaping
Right.
and we're IT. Let's just fill it up."
Well, because here's the thing. Let me come back to that for just a second. And that is that you do have to have enough in your pipeline that you do have a high probability of winning. Now, the reality is you're probably not. Let's face it. There's not going to be a lot in there, but do you really need a lot is my question.
Mm,
Okay. You need the ones that are important to you to win. Now, does that mean every single one of them is a gotta win? Well, I hope you feel that way at some level, Michael, when you're stepping up to bid, because otherwise, back to what you were saying earlier, you're wearing people out. My point is that you have to have enough in that pipeline that you have spent time scoping out, developing the relationships with a government customer, developing your relationships with many different teammates, of sitting down and figuring out what would our strategy be to price this thing if we were to go after it. We have a high probability of winning. That's a gut feel, right? Let's face it. Yes, it's in our pipeline because we have, let's go back to your comment, an 80% chance of winning it. Okay, now let's get serious about that pricing strategy because we can. We're not going to just throw numbers together and toss it into the ether. What you need to do is to scope out the clients that you love and love you, scope out the teammates that you know are good teammates, and maybe you compete some of those to get the best, right? But you're really looking for those opportunities that match you and match the kind of government customer that you want to be servicing. And it's not the landscape kind of opportunities in an IT world. So you have to do your homework. When you're asking your BD people to do their homework, you're asking them to do that early identification process, Michael. Okay. And with that, you're bringing in the pricing experts of the world to come up with what your strategic pricing approach ought to be for that opportunity.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Well, and I think for a lot of folks, whether it's perfect or not, most companies can handle writing their technical write-ups and overviews and resumes and a lot of this stuff. Not
Right.
everybody, right? Not everybody's great
Right,
at that.
right.
But at some level, they can communicate that. And it's easy for them to realize, I didn't clearly communicate this or that. But I do think for a lot of folks, pricing is such a mystery
It is.
on
And it's
how to get to that right. So how would you recommend a company prepare its strategic pricing in order to win more?
most important thing that they can do is to, first of all, you got to know your government customer. You got to know their flavor, their taste for how have things been running. If it's there's an existing or two existing and they're combining them, you got to get the flavor for what their palate will take. Okay. You've got to get somebody to do price to win. Now, if that's done externally, fine. If you're doing it internally in your own corporation, that's okay. But my point is you got to know what your target is. And it's a range. It's never just a number. It's a range. When people tell me, well, the number is this, I'm like, it's not that exact, folks. You got to do the analysis. You got to do the hard work to go find out what it is the range that that customer is willing to pay for. And more importantly, are they willing to pay for more or no? At the end of the day, if we have two outstanding technical proposals, price is going to win over everything else. That's the way it is. And at that stage, you have to say, okay, if everybody is outstanding and we're aiming for, I don't know, 500 million to 510 million, we want to be at 500 million or even below. Now you have to know that in order to know what you're aiming for. Like, would you set out to go somewhere cross country if you didn't know where you were going? You wouldn't. You'd know the route you were going to take. That's your strategic pricing. But you'd also know the price to win. Where's my target? Am I going to San Diego? Am I going to Seattle? You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you have to know what your competitors are likely to do. That means you need to do black hat, not only on the technical, but black hat on the pricing as well, to know what they're going to do. And then you say to yourself, aha, now I know what we have to do. You have to analyze yourself. That's an important step because the company usually doesn't do that until it's time to, okay, we're done with the technical solution. Now let's do the price. They don't even start to do that until they're done. You need to be doing the price at the beginning so you can fine tune it and refine it as you go along. Does that
Right.
make sense, Michael?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think a lot of people save pricing for last. And it's like, if you don't think you can be competitive, why would you fill out the other 200 pages of the proposal?
You wouldn't.
It doesn't make sense. So like you need to go in knowing you can be competitive, knowing what those ranges are. And
Right.
people ask me all the time, well, how do I guess that? I'm like, well, you don't guess it. If
You don't
you
guess.
can look through what that
Right.
agency is buying, even if it's not a recompete, you can look through and see, well, when the last time they bought landscaping, when the last time they bought cybersecurity, when the last time they bought construction, when the last time they bought fill in the blank, and you can see what they paid for it. And you can reverse engineer that and go, okay, this is probably how this was broken down, because you're not going to
Right.
get the pricing. You might be able to find, depending on what tools you're using, you might be able to find the previous RFP, depending on how long it was and all that.
Right.
But you can start to figure some things out pretty quickly on what it
Right.
looked like. And that's where a lot of companies that get into this market and just say, well, we just want to win. We'll lose money, we'll break even,
Oh
we'll
my
whatever.
God.
And then you've got companies that come in the market and they bid $500,000 on something, and the next offer is like 1.2 million. And they're like, they lost all that money. I don't know if you've seen the movie War Dogs, but that's probably one of my
Mm-hmm.
most favorite scenes in there, where they're sitting down. I think it's in the Pentagon somewhere, and they're like, so why did you choose us? And I'm like, you were the cheapest. And I'm like, if you don't mind me asking, by how much? And they're like, $50 million cheaper.
It's a lot of
And
money,
they go
right?
out in the hall and they start screaming and yelling and all that, because they're like, because they had no idea what they were doing.
Right.
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 They could have
Right.
added another $49.5 million to their
Again, you got to
proposal and
know
won.
where you're going. You
Yeah.
have to know what you're targeting.
And in that situation, everything you didn't add was all profit.
Yep.
That's all gone. And so that's why, like the price to win concept is pricing it at the best rate in order to win and make the most money.
Absolutely
That's
true.
where people miss that whole concept. And for me, it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
that's where you really want to be. And if you lose the contract, but in order to win it, you would have had to go to a point where there's only a 4 or 5% profit. You didn't want it anyway.
No.
Like, you didn't want that contract.
I often talk about the one time somebody, I was working for a large company, large aerospace company, and they said to me, Marsha, we got to get to a 1.3 multiplier. And I went, oh my God. Right. And so I said, I can get you there, but you won't like it.
Yeah.
And they said, get us there. And so I got you there. And then we won. And then I looked at the project manager and I said, go make money on that sucker.
Yeah.
You can't. You
Yeah.
can't.
It's just hard. Yeah.
Very, very hard.
We had a client who wanted to be real competitive. This was years ago, on their first contract with DLA, and they won. And it was about like a 9 or 10% profit, maybe. I think it might have been closer to 7 or 8, but it was a really small profit on this one deal. And of course, on their first deal, they messed up the shipping. And
Jeez.
because they messed up the shipping, not only did they lose the profit, they had to come up with money out of their pocket to fix the problem. And so I think at the end of the day, they lost somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10,000 on a $60,000 order.
Ouch.
Ouch. Yeah, absolutely. And so that happens quite often, where somebody doesn't leave room for mistakes, doesn't leave room for whatever, because they get in their way over their head. And, there are a lot of courses online right now pitching about how easy it is to do this, and how, just, go find somebody that you can resell their products and ask them for a quote and double their price, just double their price, and you'll make all that money on it. And then they lose and they lose and they lose, or they win and then they have no idea how to deliver and how to do invoices or whatever. There's an example that I've given a handful of times on this one contract for a client of ours that won. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like $86,000 in power strips or something like that. And on the surface, fairly easy to make money on this contract. But then the supplier, instead of shipping like one crate of power strips, shipped it in 32 boxes.
Oh, jeez.
32 different shipments. So there wound up being 32 different invoices, 32 different incidents that they had to, record and track and manage. And then some of the invoices were off and the government wouldn't accept them. And, payment got delayed. And so they wind up in a situation where there's this order that should have been a drop ship, easy thing, winds up taking 6 months to reconcile. And you've got HR involved, you've got shipping involved, you got all these people. And so there's 4 or 5 people on the staff that, instead of chasing new orders, are trying to resolve this thing on power strips where there's like a $6,000 profit or something like that. And so the time wasted on it, it was completely ridiculous because again, it was a first time they were doing all this stuff. So in your mind, like with the whole, again, bidding less to win more, as we're starting to wrap up here, do you have like maybe 2 or 3 tips that you haven't shared so far on how to optimize this in order to actually make it work?
Well, I think the most important thing, of course, is the stuff we've talked about, is doing your homework. Okay. I can't emphasize that enough. But more importantly, it's the convincing arguments that you put into your narrative, that you put into your proposal, the value proposition. And we talked about that before, Michael, but I can't emphasize the value proposition part of it enough in the pricing, in the price volume. I just, shall I say, retooled a narrative for a client a couple of days ago, where the first thing I read in their narrative, "We are pleased to submit." I
Hmm.
roll my eyes.
Yeah, that's very
Okay.
convincing.
Oh yeah. I want
Everybody's
to.
pleased to submit.
I'm unhappy to submit is what I almost want to laughingly put
Yeah.
in there. So I rewrote them an introduction that was very powerful. Okay. That from the get-go tells the customer what value that we're bringing and why this price means so much to them, to the government. What are you getting? 1, 2, 3. Now, we didn't have the time to put in a visual that convinced them, but not only that, but I said to them, in addition to that convincing beginning argument, was there were appendices that they could put in that they weren't planning to put in that would help the evaluation go, aha, I see why these people are more, not only reasonable, are more realistic. Now, realism wasn't part of the evaluation, but the more convincing arguments you can give, the better off you are going to be, that
Yeah.
says, this is why my competition doesn't cut it.
I think the "we are pleased to submit" is similar to like on resumes where people are say, have their objective on there.
Yeah,
And everybody I talk to is like, don't put an objective in there. Your objective is to find a job. Like, let's get
right,
something a little more convincing in there that kind of soups this thing up. But it's just become like the template that people use and it's expected and things like that. So switching it
right.
up immediately changes the perspective on yours when they don't see that,
Oh,
like, oh, this doesn't look like everybody else's thing here. So I
yes,
think that's a really good tip. So real quick, final question:
sure.
what are like your favorite maybe 2 or 3 places to do the homework? Because that is a question that everybody has,
Yes.
is where do I do the homework? And there's hundreds of different ways you can go about it, but for you and the way you do things, what are your top 2 or 3?
Obviously, GovWin, everybody goes there. But then there's DACIS, DACIS. DACIS has information that other people may or may not have.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm only going to give you that as my additional one because I love it. And why do I
Nice.
love it? Because it's got information, like I say, that nobody else has or nobody else is portraying. You're going to get some insight that you couldn't get somewhere else, or that a lot of digging somewhere else could have upturned it, right? But that's going to give it to you better.
Yeah. For those who've never heard of that one, is that a free or a paid service?
I think it's paid. I
Okay.
believe it's
Cool.
paid.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, that's a really good tip. I don't know that we have had that one from anybody else before. So I have heard of it, but I've actually never checked it out. So I'll have to go check
Okay.
it out as well. So
Okay.
that'll be
Okay.
really good. So thanks for coming on and talking about this. I think the philosophy is spot on. It's what people need to hear, whether they want to hear it or not. But I think the people that adopt the philosophy in 6 months will say, this is allowing us to not stress out near as much. We were planning on ramping up the team and now we don't have to do that. This allows us to focus in our wheelhouse, which is much better.
Right.
Which my final point is, when you're focused in your wheelhouse, you get better at it. your
Oh,
your team
yeah.
gets smarter at it, you get faster at it, regardless of what it is, whether it's delivering a product or delivering a service.
Right.
You get so much better that eventually you get more profitable.
Well, and not only that, but everybody loves putting together what they need to put together.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? They're not hating every morning that they get up
That's
to
right.
do something.
That's right. And you know what? Everybody loves winning.
Oh my God, yes.
Everybody loves winning. That's one of the things where I always pick on certain friends of mine that are like, oh, this team is a champion or whatever. I'm like, you didn't even care about sports until that team in your backyard all of a sudden started winning. And now you're on the bandwagon because everybody loves winning.
Loves winning, right.
And so if you can get into a culture and a mindset of winning, you can get your team on board and you won't be unstoppable, but man, you will be in a position that it is so drastically different when you're meeting and talking with customers, when you're out networking, when you're
Because
on
you're
LinkedIn,
clicking.
because
You're
everything's working.
clicking.
Yeah, you're clicking. Everything's working. And it's just a different place to work. Thank you for talking about this. I think it is a strategy everybody needs to adopt.
Well, it makes people very uncomfortable when I talk about it. It really
That's
does. Because it
It
means
doesn't
they
hurt.
got to really, really be sharp about what they do. That's what it means.
And everybody needs to adopt the philosophy. So thank you again, and I look forward to having you on again. I really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to the podcast and screenshot it and tag me on LinkedIn or whatever social media you use. So thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.